we should be live. Sorry, I'm really sorry about all the delays and stuff. There's been bit stuff going on uh, with me and like personal life and family stuff that's kept me a bit occupied uh, for today. And so, yeah, stream got delayed and stuff. And the quality is not exactly where I'd like it for the presentation stuff. But this is my first time doing this type of thing, so hopefully I want to do more of these, like learn more about like deep dive style uh, content in the future. Uh, like I have an idea for one for next week as well. That hopefully should be have a bit more time to work on, be a bit better quality and stuff than this current one. Yeah, that one's gonna be because Pippa's, revealing her outfit and stuff. Uh, and just like, naval themed one, which as a naval fan, a naval history fan, very excited for that, glad to see that. And she mentions the Panzer Schiff uh, in her tweet about it. And so I'm gonna do a quick little dive on, like, deep dive stream on that class of boats and like the three that were made and the history behind that, because I think that would be pretty interesting and it's a nice kind of tie-in to what's currently happening in the realm of flavor. But yeah, so that's the plan for next week. Next week's gonna be a bit of a lighter week as well, just because like of some of the stuff ongoing, like I said. But I still hopefully intend to get some more streams done and maybe more of a guerrilla type thing rather than proper scheduled streams. I do think we'll probably do one on during the week, like Dead Space, probably Tuesday if I had to guess. I haven't made the firm schedule yet, but that's the plan. But yeah, on to the presentation. Like I said, it's gonna be a bit scuffed because I was gonna spend last night and today working on it and stuff. Like work on it more after doing some research earlier, but family stuff came up, so didn't have as much time. So we're gonna start at the very beginning of medieval artillery pieces, because I'm going for a more broader like definition to include these, and we're gonna include touch on some other things later on as well. So what you see on the left is, you can see that's a Chinese trebuchet. So how that one works is basically, unlike some of the more like the later trebuchets, which are like radial, uh, and they are like a lot more mechanical in nature. This one is basically enough people pull on it, it'll launch the rock. It's a very early style of trebuchet, but it is still very effective, of course. And like this is just a scale model, and so you can see it doesn't really have wheels in the scale model. Maybe it does in the um like in reality, but when I was reading, it was mainly said that they were used more as like siege and anti-siege, so from within like a fortified place you'd launch it, and so they wouldn't be moving around much regardless. That's kind of a general theme with most medieval, ancient to medieval era siege weaponry, is you're not really moving them around as much or using them on the battlefield per se. You're more using them in the siege role that they're originally like designed for, of breaking down a wall or that type of thing. And then up in the top right, you can see it's cut off a bit, but that's a catapult. Uh, Fairly standard, typical like medieval, uh, like fairly well known medieval siege weapon. Uh, Cut the rope on the left side of it. launch a rock. Nothing too much to say about that. Of course, to be noted that rocks are not the only thing that you could fire with these. And a lot of time, or sometimes you would see like corpses and stuff fired to spread disease. And so that's the kind of the first instances of varied munitions, which is something we'll get more into later as we advance through history and the technology advances and adapts even more. And that right next to me here at the bottom right is a mounted ballista. It's one of the first kind of versions of a mobile siege weapon, which as it's a ballista that is mounted on a horse. So that is one like the few instances in this time period where you'd have a much more mobile form of artillery. Other examples would be having it on a ship or something where it's a lot easier to move something of that weight. And this is obviously a lighter like in terms of weight and also by extension payload and like killing capacity and such than the catapult and trebuchet. And it's a different role where it's more of an anti-personnel role for the cart ballista, whereas the trebuchet and the catapult were more used as an anti-siege, destroying fortifications role. Alright, so next we move into the age of like the cannon, early gunpowder age and such. So in the top we have like a typical Napoleonic cannon. Uh, Sorry, no, that's a bit earlier than Napoleonic, my mistake. I'm talking about Napoleonic a bit later, but that's like the kind of standard, like fairly standard cannon that you would see. Uh, and then to the right of that is a bit older. If you can kind of tell, like as cannons get older, as the cannons get older, they're gonna, unless they're for a specific role, the general design trend is that the um, barrel gets longer, the muzzle gets shorter, like the width. So, yeah, like the so you don't have as large projectile in terms of diameter. And so, like as you can see, the top left is fairly skinny. And not necessarily that tall. It's a more mobile piece, and so it has more battlefield applications than the one on the right, top right, which is naval cannon, which is a lot harder to move where you want it to go. But because it's on a ship, that kind of alleviates that burden a lot, and so you're able to have the more powerful in terms of like output by definition, because it's firing a larger cannonball, but you don't have the mobility that you would have to sacrifice on land. And then at the bottom left, which is something, this was interesting that I didn't know that much about, surprising, kind of surprised me, but it was really interesting to learn, is that the Javanese, so those would be like Indonesia, Malaysia, that region, were very adept cannon makers and like adept using cannons, and so this is one of their design. It's a double-barreled swivel-mounted breech-loaded cannon. So that's generally going to be a lot lighter than the other cannon you see, even though it is double-barrel, because the barrels, as again, are not that wide and they're not that long. But the benefit that this would have, being swivel-mounted, is that it's a lot easier to aim because you don't have to move the entire like wheeled cannon. You can just kind of swivel it, point in the direction. And it was those types that would start to see more use on ships and stuff, later leading to more common turrets and eventually through that like turreted tanks. And then the last type, which I want to specify, is the howitzer, which is, or sorry, this is the bombard howitzer later, but it's a similar function, which is this is the more it just harkens back to the more traditional role of the siege weapon, which is anti-fortification. So you would have a larger barreled weapon like that, it would be more intended to bust through fortifications, like destroy a wall that you're firing at. Uh, and this is one of the largest vert cannons that was created in terms of like caliber, I believe. But eventually, those started to fall out of favor. They were replaced with. Oh, did I repeat the image? Yes, I repeat the image. Oops. Sorry, it is a bit scuffed. But those are starting to be replaced at the end of the Napoleonic era with more traditionally, as we would see it, artillery, like howitzers and the like, uh, that were more. They had transitioned heavily away from like anti fortification, and they were almost not exclusively, because there were still like the heavy howitzers and bunker busting shells and stuff. But they were a lot more focused on firing at anti-personnel and the amount of damage you could deal to like the individual soldiers rather than the fortification. Because you'd be like, this would be the type of scenario where bombing trenches, like firing on trenches and stuff. So you want shrapnel and high explosives as opposed to armor piercing that you would want in a like if you're trying to pierce a destroyer, like a battleship destroyer or a bunker. Uh, with the obvious exception to that doctrine of wanting high explosive more and more, you can see at the very top there's the tank destroyer. Sorry, words. There's those are battleship cannons, uh, and so without getting too far in depth on the different varieties of shells and such, these are some of the larger. These are from HMS Dreadnought, uh, and are one of the larger uh, ship cannons of the time around. This is around World War One we're talking about. Uh, and so for that you'd want they could fire both high explosive armor piercing, semi armor piercing, uh, but obviously depending on the type of target. Uh, but what's important to realize is the difference in size between what you can generally have on land and what you can have in the ocean. Because obviously in a ship you can have a lot uh, higher like weight of cannon because it's a lot easier to move it around and have it float. Whereas on land, if you're trying to move it at the time, you'd have like maybe a truck if you're very lucky, but mainly horses or by hand. And so you wanted it to be a bit lighter so that you can drag it around easier. Yeah. Yeah, or by train, and so that kind of limited um the design requirements accordingly. Uh, and then so now now into World War II era. We start to look at where cannons get a lot more specialized. Because as after the development of the tank and the aircraft, this is where artillery and cannons start to kind of evolve and have to adapt to overcome those challenges. Uh, and so we see this in the bottom left with the Pak 40 anti-tank gun, which is 75 millimeter uh, anti-tank gun. So it's designed with the purpose of destroying armored vehicles. And then what you can see on the top, so on the right, is a multi-purpose naval gun. And that's basically indicative of the adaptation of naval guns to have to also be able to deal with aircraft and be able to fire at aircraft, which means adapting their ability to fire greater elevations, the ability to fire different types of shells that are and a higher fire rate so that they are able to fire effectively against aircraft, because it's a lot easier to miss an aircraft than a different target. Because aircrafts are flying in a three-dimensional space, whereas land target or even a naval target is not kind of in that, not quite as many variables. And then in the top left, you can see the railway gun. So this is basically like the kind of pinnacle of bunker busting howitzer culture. Like if you got the people who invented the howitzer and you like, this is kind of their dream come true of being able to just absolutely destroy anything that you fire upon. Of course, the big downside with this is the transport, because it is exclusively used on a railway, because it's that's the kind of chassis that it's on. And so that's kind of, again, indicative, not to overuse the words, but there's kind of shows the balance between weight and like ability to move it around. Because if you go too far in either end, if you go too far in terms of mobility, you're just not going to be able to destroy what you're firing at as effectively. And this is something that can definitely be found early into the war with some anti-tank guns, is where they just don't really have the penetrating power required, because they're designed to be super easily mobile uh, and moved around fast. But it's also kind of the inverse is possible, where you have the German railway guns, where they are very powerful but require a ton of crew, weigh super large amounts. They are not able to move off of the railway, so they're limited to the railway system that they're on. And of course, they're fairly easy targets for aerial bombing because of how large they are. Whereas the smaller guns, like the Pak-40, could be concealed fairly easy. And then one of the other final things I wanted to cover specifically before we just go into more of a general talk about artillery and its usage and shells and that kind of thing, is the mortar, which kind of evolved and adapted from artillery. And so it's basically used in essentially the same way as traditional artillery. Well, not traditional, but like the modern concept of artillery is used for bombarding a position in through like an arc, like a projectile fired in an arc. But the difference with mortars is they are generally they can be a lot smaller and a lot easier to use than like modern artillery, like howitzers. And so they're portable, and you can also adapt them to a larger scale, as can be seen at the bottom right. With that's a German World War II mechanized howitzer. So you put that on like a tank chassis, a treaded system, and so you have the maneuverability afforded by such a vehicle, but also you can have the firepower of a large mortar. And because you have like a larger mortar like that, if you can see just even through the image, you can see that the width must be pretty wide, and so that kind of enables higher capacity for payloads and range. Whereas in the bottom left, it's a lot smaller, but it's man portable and can be taken by one or two people, and so it's a lot better for like traditional infantry battalions and platoons, because then they're able to provide their own suppression and artillery support, even if it's at a smaller scale. You also see with spigot mortars, which is where the Piat British anti-tank gun is derived from, that same design, and I believe hedgehogs, the hedgehog depth charges are of the similar design. So there is like a bit of uh, adaptability to the mortar system, and that kind of enables it because it's cheaper, fairly adaptable, uh, and fairly rugged. It's a lot more flexible than artillery, as it essentially functions as a scaled down artillery piece. Alright, so that's all the slides, but there are still some more stuff to talk about in regards to, for example, different ammo types and stuff that would be used by artillery. So one of the things that I was meaning to make slides off, but I just didn't have the time, unfortunately, is uh, different shell types. And so what you can kind of see throughout history is you start off with really just rocks and like ballista bolts. But because ballista bolts are exclusive to ballista and the ballista can't fire rocks, I'm kind of counting those generally a bit separately. So you'd have a rock, you could have maybe like a flaming log or something like that you could fire with it, or a diseased like corpse of an animal or something. But generally there's not a lot of variety of ammunition. Now as you look into the Napoleonic and the gunpowder era, you start to see more variety with heated shot, and then grape shot and chain shot. And you can see that there's more variety due to the nature of gunpowder firearms being able to more easily fire uh, and all fire projectiles and also fire them fairly like straight ahead, whereas with a catapult and a trebuchet, you have to fire in an arc because the cannon can do head-on fire. That kind of enables you to have different types of shells that you wouldn't normally, because with like if you try to use a concept with grape shot with the trebuchet, it would not be as effective because grape shot is primarily anti-personnel, so you want to be using it when something's getting close to you, uh, and with the trebuchet you kind of have like a limited range essentially, where you can't fire if it's too close. And then eventually, as we move into like the World War One, World War Two era, we start to see uh, different variety of shot as well, with high explosive. As the name suggests, that's more that's rounds that are basically designed for to maximize their explosive potential. So the goal of those is shrapnel, starting fires, generally like a more anti-personnel uh, based like and more effective against personnel because it's more designed to have an explosion over a large area. Whereas you also on the opposite end have armor piercing shells, which are designed to pierce armors, if the name doesn't give it away, and also to be able to penetrate as armor technology and like bunker building kind of evolves. So too must artillery to keep up with that, and so it kind of has that similar role to ancient and traditional siege weaponry of fortification destruction, and so it still has an explosive. It still can have an explosive charge and explosive potential inside the shell, but the primary it's going to be a lot sturdier and have more penetrating power than the high explosive. And this can also be adjusted somewhat with fuses, because if you have a higher fuse, then you can have like the shell explode once it's made its way through some uh, sections of like whatever material you're trying to penetrate. If you have impact fused, it's going to explode on impact, as the name would suggest. And you can also set fuses for air burst, where it explodes in the air, or you would also want it at the time you'd want it to explode like probably I think roughly like human height, like 5 feet up, so that you would not hit the ground and have like the chance where it could potentially impact the shell and on occasion cause the shell to, if it like the shell wasn't functioning, to could be a problem, and it causes a lot more explosive damage as well. And finally, there's like the more utility shells, which aren't designed for their penetrating or explosive power. So you can see gas shells, which are designed to have gas like emit out of them once upon landing, and those were used for gas attacks. You have smoke shells, similar concept, but with smoke. So there's a designed for when you want to like provide cover and concealment. Well, not cover, but concealment. Like when you're pushing forward, or if you're trying to line like an enemy position with smoke. And then you also see star shells, which are used for illumination. Think flares, basically, that can be fired from a cannon, and that's the general gist. But what you also see at this time is, because of like just the design, it kind of, whereas with a cannon with grape shot you could shoot directly straight forward, with like World War I, World War II era artillery, you don't really have that luxury anymore, because it is more in the kind of howitzer style of arc firing that you can see with the mortar. So with the exception of like anti-tank guns and sometimes anti-air guns, if they had enough depression to be able to fire like straight, but otherwise you would not have the depression to fire like near you if you were a standard like artillery piece. So that's the general gist of it. I mean, there's a couple other things I could touch on, I think, but I think that covers most of what I want to talk about. Uh, I did want to touch on, again, I didn't have time to make a slide on this, but how since the advent of modern technology and modern warfare, Call of Duty trademark, please don't copyright strike me, Call of Duty, for saying that or something. Uh, there's kind of been the, not the, artillery's not necessarily, like traditional, like World War I, World War II era artillery is not necessarily obsolete, as you can still definitely be seen in such cases as Ukraine, and there's still like howitzers and stuff in service in many countries. But with the advent of missiles, which can carry such a wide variety of projectiles, a lot farther distances, can be fired from air, and have just generally like a lot more use cases. They've kind of surpassed artillery in both importance and usefulness, and so that's kind of what we're starting to see in the modern. What we've not started, but definitely seeing in the modern age. And so it's depending on uh, the evolution of modern warfare, the role of artillery on the of traditional artillery on the battlefield could be uh, obsolete within within like my lifetime. So next 60 years, let's say. But like I said, there is still definitely use cases for artillery. Like it's because it is, shells are generally a lot cheaper than a missile. That's the one thing that artillery kind of has over missiles, is inexpensiveness in terms of the shell. So depending on how, if missiles get cheaper and cheaper, that's kind of where the death of the howitzer would kind of begin to take shape. things go up, things go down. End of class. But yeah, that's the thing with missiles is they are essentially just guided rockets, and rockets are another form of artillery I didn't get to touch on here, which is essentially just better propelled cannons. And I mean every aspect of warfare really boils down to just rocks. And artillery is a particularly fun type of rock because it goes boom, and that's part of why I like it. But like I said, it's kind of been made obsolete by missiles because they can aim a lot better. And with because artillery never really had as much usefulness on as an infantry role because it's just too large generally. The closest you could add to having infantry wield is like mortars and the Piat like spigot like the Piat anti-tank system. But with missiles, you can see like there are uh, portable anti-air missiles that infantry can have, and portable anti-tank missiles that they can have, and so there's kind of, by its nature of being smaller and easier to use for people, it's kind of taken over another role traditionally held by artillery of the anti-tank and also in some, depending on how you define it, the anti-air role. It'll be fine, Alberta. There's it's I mean it's better than, like, I don't know. Like there's worse things to be talking about. This is purely educational. It's just talking about how they all work. Yeah. That's kind of all I had with the presentation stuff before. Uh, I wanted to prepare more, but with the family stuff that happened and some stuff earlier in the week, I just didn't have the time. But I do want to do more of these types of things in the future, uh, focusing more on specific, uh, like probably more specific topics than just broad artillery, uh, because I think that was kind of that kind of threw me for a hurdle bit after kind of the honeymoon period of like, oh yeah, there's actually just so much to cover in so little time. Uh, but I do want to go on to other topics, probably with a general focus on military history, because that's kind of where I'm interested and where I know more about. But I'm definitely open to any suggestions of topics that people want me to cover uh, in any field, really. Even if it's in like maths or sciences or whatever, I don't really understand that, but I'll give it my best shot. Uh, and I do plan on doing another similar type of thing uh, at the end of next week, probably Friday, actually, which will be on the Panzerschiff uh, class of warships. And that's kind of to celebrate Pippa's new outfit, is the plan there. Uh, but yeah, other than that, I'm sure this is kind of a like shorter stream. I wish I'd had more time and stuff to prepare, and I'm a bit disappointed in the quality of this. But given it's my first time, hoping it went all right, and that I'll be able to do more of these in the future. And I'm also going to be doing another Dead Space stream Tuesday, and that's all that I have planned at the moment. But just like the Dead Space and the um, Panzerschiff stream, but I do want to do a Gorilla stream like on Wednesday or something if I have time. But I just don't know if that's feasible. Uh, yeah. Yeah, I want to make, yeah, short is good. I want to make like the more educational, like talk about this stuff a bit shorter, because that way I can also like kind of post them maybe in like in the future is the idea. Uh, but I do want to also, I feel bad because I haven't been like done a stream like a longer stream in a bit because of personal stuff. And I won't be able to stream that much this week either. But I'll try and figure out if when I can. So thank you all for coming. Hope you have a happy time zone. Otsorin.